Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of our Back to Life podcast. This is season 2, episode 24, and my guest today is Babita Spinelli. I'm pretty sure you'll enjoy the insight that Babita will bring through our conversation. She is the CEO and founder of Babita Spinelli Group and Opening the Doors Psychotherapy. She's got a very interesting background that she'll talk about. Babita is an internationally recognized, award-winning psychotherapist, executive coach, mental health consultant, and relationship expert. She focuses on helping people optimize their relationships and thrive in their lives. As a former attorney and Wall Street executive, Babita also brings a unique perspective to managing mental health issues and relationships in the workplace, developing business strategy relating to human dynamics, and resolving high conflict issues. Her corporate background and experience are key to partnering with executives and leaders who recognize the benefit of a holistic approach to lead their organizations and navigate the unique challenges they face in the workplace, in their personal lives, and in their relationships. So, tune in, listen to this. Babita's going to talk an awful lot about how the pandemic, she believes the pandemic, really helped people become more aware of this thing called mental health. We're going to talk about where this term mental health came from, and you're going to pick up some things that are going to help you identify when you're a bit out of balance and develop a strategy with some real-time practices that can help you move forward to creating more fulfillment in your life and more resilience and more recovery. So thanks for joining, and let's join our guest, Babita Spinelli. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this episode of our Back to Life podcast. As you heard in my intro, our guest today, Babita Spinelli, is doing some wonderful work that I think all of you are going to connect with, either individually for yourself and or certainly for somebody that you know. So Babita, thanks so much for joining us. I appreciate it. Why don't you tell the audience, in a couple of minutes or so, where you've come from with your career? It's really interesting, and what you're up to right now.
Sure. It's such a pleasure to be here, Danny. Thank you.
Sure.
So I started my career actually as a lawyer. I went to law school. I segued into corporate America. I did a lot of consulting, a lot of corporate work, worked at a big four. I then segued onto Wall Street. I was an executive on Wall Street. And I found throughout my journey, they still felt like something was missing, even though I kept reaching pinnacles of success and, whatever that version is. And I noticed that I was really just fascinated by human behavior, by relationships, by the way people interacted, workplace dynamics. I enjoyed working with clients and individuals across business lines. And I really was struggling, though, to figure out what I wanted to do, noticing the things that I did enjoy in the workplace and observe, but still felt, really not fulfilled. And so I actually went to a therapist, incredible journey, and continue to do so. Mm-hmm. And she said, "Have you thought about being a psychotherapist?" And so I literally was like, So for a while I did double trouble. I balanced both because sometimes you just can't just up and suddenly do a whole clinical journey and go back to school. But ultimately I went back. I did five more years. I trained clinically, and I became a psychotherapist. And I began with a traditional psychotherapy practice. Mm-hmm. And I found myself feeling so passionate about it, and I still do that I wanted to sort of integrate being a psychotherapist with what I also learned in corporate America. And so I decided to form another company where I do a lot of mental health consulting, and I do a lot of mental health consulting in the workplace. I do a lot of CEO and leadership psychotherapy and wellness, and really try and advocate around mental health issues, across industry. So that's sort of in a nutshell where I am and what I do.
Wow. Yeah. And I've certainly seen, we've gotten to know one another, and I've seen some of your readings. or your writings rather, and some of your videos, and it's just great work. When you were on that track throughout corporate and the Big Four and Wall Street, what was your definition of success then?
No, great question. Then at that time, I think a lot of it going back to sort of my roots and some of the messaging was, am I checking off the boxes?
Mm-hmm.
Am I actually doing great work? Am I conscientious about my work? What is my work ethic? Am I leading my teams and managing people
Mm-hmm.
effectively? And of course, there are all of those performance reviews. Again, am I checking off the boxes? But over time, I became much more attuned to understand, well, there's got to be more than just checking off the boxes.
Right.
There is success is not just about that.
Mm,
Success is also about how you feel about what you're doing. Are you aligned with your values,
mm,
whatever you do?
mm-hmm.
And are you sort of putting that out there in the world and feeling like your integrated best version self, even though we're always evolving? But
Sure.
I have to be honest, like during that time in my, younger years and early on, there wasn't a lot of guidance around being attuned to that mental health, being more aware.
Sure.
So, it was following the template.
Yeah. Yes. Get your promotions, get your bonus, right? Make some money and those things. That was success, certainly when I was, gosh, in the 80s. And as you said, the messaging from your parents and peers going through college and university, that was really it. And I think, and you and I spoke about this a little bit before we started recording the podcast, as I was growing up, and I was born in 63, so, kind of growing up in the 70s and the 80s, mental health, I never really heard that term. Of course, you would hear mentally ill. I
Mhm.
remember growing up as a young altar server at my church, we would go to a state hospital, right, for mental patients. And, I was young, and that was really what set the image for me of this mental health that we have now. But it was all in the mentally ill, schizophrenia, as you said, these diagnoses. How have you seen that changed now? And when did you start to hear this term of mental health and the focus on people within the workplace?
Mm-hmm. Great question. And I agree with you. When I was growing up, same thing, same generation. It really was a diagnosis, and it was, connected to that there's an illness and that you have to just make sure you get that help or take medication. It wasn't
Mhm.
part of what I call the Mr. Rogers sweater that
Mhm.
we wear the way that it is now. From my lens, I think it was a slow, like we call this the slow, change that happened. It was a phased approach. People might think, wow, it just happened during the pandemic. Yes, I
Mhm.
think the pandemic definitely leveraged and brought it to the forefront,
Mhm.
in terms of mental. That's what I call the gem in the rubble. That's,
Mhm.
that part. But I feel it was a phased approach. I think it started to happen when some big events started to take place in terms of
Mhm.
mental health. I think 9/11, slowly but surely. Then I think
Mhm.
other things that were taking place out in the world, other life events started to
Mhm.
then begin to bring mental health to the forefront. Then we
Sure.
had a pandemic.
Yeah.
Um, and then in the workplace, I believe, as again, during the pandemic, when people were feeling very burnt out, when there was what I call, Groundhog's Day, there was much more of sort of an awareness around mental health and mental health in the workplace. Even though people were working remotely, they
Mhm.
found themselves being much more cognizant that there's some issues that take place in the workplace, even when they're not at work.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting that you talk about that events, kind of that slow progression, because as I think about it, I was in corporate America during 9/11, and then I was out of corporate America. Well, I was still working in there, as you and I do as speakers and consultants, during the elections of the past 8 or 12 years. And I did see a change in a lot of people in terms of their narrative about our country and the elections and politicians and how it connected to work. So yeah, I never really thought about that. I think the pandemic, as you said, certainly fanned that flame and brought it more to the forefront right now. How would you define mental health? I saw something. Let me just read for you. I saw something quick, but I want to get your thoughts on it. The the WHO, World Health Organization, I asked who defined mental health, and they say they conceptualize mental health as, quote, a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities, can cope with the normal stresses of life, can work productively and fruitfully, and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. What are your thoughts on mental health? It's interesting that I look for that definition because I don't know that I would have had one. I probably would have said, feeling good about your current state in life and feeling good about doing the work on those other states of your life that need, to grow and evolve. What are your thoughts on the definition of this thing called mental health?
Sure. I mean, I definitely am aligned with the definition of the World Health Organization, but I also think it is more than that. That could also just be like some of my psychoanalytic training. I think mental health is also about our own attunement, about how we are feeling, yes, but how we regulate our emotions. What is our self-subjective experience and perception about ourselves? Are we able to reach out and lean into healthy coping mechanisms? Do we feel mentally fit? So it does go back into our emotional states. Are we also attuned? Our mental health is, are we also attuned and operating at our optimal in our life within ourselves, but also our relationships? So all of that falls within mental health.
Yeah, I saw that piece you just did not too long ago on the relationships. That was really good. How mental health, impacts our relationships. Yeah. So how do people, and as I listen to you, and I kind of agree with you, I do, it all does come back to that feeling, right? That intuition we have about how am I feeling about a state that I'm in, right? With another person, with a job, so it's kind of that me and another outside source or force. And then I like what you said there is, how am I really feeling about me and the world, right? So I guess that's that self-image, that's that self-perception. How would somebody identify, if they go into that rut, so to speak, how would they identify that, wow, I'm a little bit out of whack right now, so to speak, for lack of a better term, and I need to do some work, either with somebody else that's going to help me, or I can do the work myself? What are some, identifiers that would show up for people?
There are many of them, and I think everyone's unique, but sometimes what comes up is someone may not feel as inspired. They may notice that something feels like lacking. They may also feel a little empty.
Right.
They feel that they're sort of running on empty, or they feel everything feels very rote, or they're in a rut. It could be simple things like they don't feel like they're getting a lot of joy. They may not feel as motivated. They could also find themselves just not even knowing what makes them happy anymore.
Right.
They could find themselves being a bit short-fused in their relationships. They could find themselves feeling slightly angry or frustrated. Their anxiety levels may be higher. They may notice that they're feeling a little anxious also in their bodies. They may feel just tired, depleted, if I haven't said that already. They may realize that, wait a second, I don't even find myself like feeling like I'm leaning into something that would be a normal, healthy coping mechanism. Like I don't even know what to reach in anymore. They could also feel socially or emotionally distant from people. Like there's so many indicators, which is why I think you and I are distinguishing. There's some things that fall within a diagnosis. There's some things that are just red flags to say something just feels off balance. And what I described are some of those things that are ones that I think people should just be mindful of, that are red flags.
Yeah, I like that. And I've certainly had conversations with an awful lot of people that have talked about those attributes that you just mentioned, those points of awareness. And I certainly had them myself during, COVID, and still do. What do you, as a psychotherapist, when you have a client and somebody comes to you, and they express that they're dealing with some of these, what's the first thing you say to them or offer them or ask them?
I mean, the first thing I usually do when someone comes in is I just ask them like, just tell me about like your life. Just share with me, you know, just what do you do? Tell me a little bit about, your environment, what's been coming up. I like it to feel like a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
People come in and they have this fear about what this is going to look like. A lot of people think, oh my God, I'm going to be doing this full intake. And there's a lot of pressure around it. But I like to say, let's just talk.
Right.
What's going on? A lot of times, what's interesting, Danny, is people usually come in about one thing and don't realize that there are a lot of other things that are happening. So they may just come in and say, I'm really frustrated, with my boss.
Mm-hmm.
I started this new job, and I think that's what it is. I'm feeling really frustrated. But then there's so many other things that are also just happening that maybe they don't realize they haven't been taking care of themselves. They're not setting boundaries. Maybe they're also having some issues in their marriage. Talk about relationship burnout, like we haven't really been connecting. And I think what we start to realize, it's the fabric of all sorts of things coming up for them.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing I like to do is just say, just tell me what's going on, and let's try and do it with compassion.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to start there. Something as just simple as that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I'm sure you're right. And for the listeners, it's probably multiple points of disengagement or discomfort, right? And you as a psychotherapist, I'm sure, as you start to pull the strings, so to speak, and let these people talk about one, I'll bet a lot of times they have the awareness that, oh my gosh, and by the way, since I'm here, here's another thing I'm struggling with. Do they usually have that self-awareness once they slow down? Let's talk a little bit about the power. You and I both know the power of self-awareness, right? To get outside, kind of be your own coach. What are some things around self-awareness that you see? What would you offer to people to enhance their self-awareness?
Mm-hmm. What a great question. And you're right, there is a distinction because there are individuals who would come in that might have a little bit more self-awareness. They've been self-reflecting. They can actually even identify, what's taking place. And they're wanting to deepen their self-awareness. Or they may say, I know there's a lot of things I need to work on. I really want to be the best version of myself. That's why I'm here. That's been happening a lot lately, which I think is fantastic, right? Yes. I want to optimize my life and just feel better about everything. Break my, unhealthy patterns, etc. Some people will just come in with a feeling. This is why I think you made such a great point. Some people will say, I don't know what it is, but is it depression? Like I'm just not feeling like myself. So I would say this. I would say that whenever you're feeling that way, I would say, really try and lean into going into therapy to figure it out. Sometimes we just need some guidance and the right questions, and to feel like we're in a safe space to be able to talk it through. I also think you could also do that if you want to lean towards, an expert who's in coaching, in wellness as well. But I would say, like, get that kind of help where they're going to be open-ended questions that are going to be asked of you to start to identify what might be coming up. Other ways to deepen self-awareness, I would say is I believe wholeheartedly around the practice of mindfulness, really slowing it down and gaining more clarity. Start to write out and notice what you're feeling, even get a feeling and say, what am I feeling today? What's coming up for me? What is the story I'm telling myself? How do I wake up every day? And what do I say to myself? Is that the story that I carry? Like, these are the things to help us get more finely attuned, to be more aware, and even ask yourself, is there another way I could look at this? Do the reframe. I suggest that a lot with leadership in the workplace. Research shows that as leaders become more successful, they actually become less self-aware
Ah,
because they are caught up in
interesting.
feeling like they have to lead
Right.
because they're in a power position, right? They feel like they're authorities to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But if they can be more self aware about how they're being perceived,
Mm-hmm.
they can then be more empathetic leaders.
Mm-hmm.
They can then lead more
Sure.
effectively.
Hey everybody, Danny Bader here, and I just want to give you an update on my contest that I participated in called 14 Days of Magic. I am now beyond 7 days and everything is going well. The 14 Days of Magic contest is sponsored by a wonderful company called Magic Mind, who has developed the first productivity drink, a small shot that you take in the morning that is intended to have many, many benefits. And you can go out and find more. I'll show you where to find more about that. The contest is this: commit to 3 areas where you want to grow over the next 14 days. Go get yourself some Magic Mind. And when you do, make sure you use our code BTL14, our promo code at checkout, and get a discount there. So you go out and get your Magic Mind and you take it and you talk about where is the value that you're getting for what you wanted. And for me, it was I wanted more energy, and then I wanted to place that more focus, get more things done in less time, and with a sense of calm. And those 3 things are certainly happening for me now as I'm approaching the second half of the 14 Days of Magic Challenge. The other thing is I'm on the doorstep of 59 years of age, and I like to hit the gym almost every morning. There's a lot of benefits in here and values for inflammation after a workout, really kind of taking care of your body a little bit. So if you're somebody that is always curious about how can I stay healthier, how can I stay more relaxed, more focused, you got to check it out. Here's where I'm going to send you. Ready? www.magicmind.co/14 days of magic, 14 days of magic. Again, it's www.magicmind.co/14 days of magic. So go ahead out there, find out more about the contest. The other really good thing is not only is this product, the way I've experienced it, going to add value for you in those areas that you want of relaxed, focus, and calm, they also donate to the rainforest, the Amazon rainforest. So when you get out there and you see about the contest, and you actually have a chance to win almost 3 months, depending on the number of entries, 1 to 3 months free subscription of Magic Mind as you post out there on all your social media and Instagram. Just use the hashtag 14 days of magic, 14 days of magic. And you'll see where to post out there as well when you go out to the website. So I'd strongly encourage you to go check it out. I think you'll be glad that you did. You'll get some value. You'll help to support the Amazon rainforest. And, you'll grow into the best version of yourself. And after all, that's what we're here for. Take care. Wishing you all the best. Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, leading that's what it is, how you're showing up, right? And when you lose sight of that, that's where leadership begins to falter. And what got you there, right, so to speak, is not going to keep you there. Yeah, I like that. I like mindfulness as well, and journaling. I do a lot of journaling. And, I think the point you make, and everybody listening, is I think our awareness, for me, here's kind of the way I see it. And you may think differently, or anybody listening, but I make a distinction between conscious and aware. And conscious for me is, your heart and your brain and your lungs are working, right? Those vital organs that make the body go. Awareness for me is when somewhat of the human spirit or the divine gets sprinkled on that, right? So every day we wake up, and heart, brain, and lung, they're working. So we're conscious. He or she is conscious. That's what we say. They're unconscious or they're conscious. Awareness, I think, is when we expand and we see that bigger picture. And we know we're connected to something bigger. And we know there's an energy inside of us all as human beings that really makes us go and connects us to other people and allows us to draw on that energy to move through the crappy times and to kind of do the work on ourselves. What are your thoughts around, awareness?
Well, I'm aligned with you there. And so I also feel like there's something, I do believe that for me, the awareness is when you can also do the deeper work and not be afraid to look at yourself. Really, in vulnerability and honesty, even when there's fears around it. And that does mean, you know, for example, going into family of origin, going into those really difficult spaces that what I call could be little t traumas or big T traumas, understanding some intergenerational spaces, looking at more closely how your behaviors have either served you or not served you and where they may come from. Being honest with your role and owning things, being able to understand those, apologize for them if one needs to. And that does take some really deep, like going into your subconscious space, and then really being able to look at that with all vulnerability and transparency and being able to own it.
Yeah.
I think what ends up happening in that process is when you can see yourself in that way, you can, and research actually does show this, you will operate differently with others so that you're going to find yourself being happier and more fulfilled. And other people are going to experience that. And this is where your collective comes in.
Right.
That projects out, right, into a higher conscious being. Then others receive that and perhaps may also influence how they operate. And then this is how it all connects. So that's part of, just to add to what you say, some of my thoughts around it.
I love them. Yeah, I think they're so spot on and so powerful. So I think the other thing is that we should all be aware of is this is okay for us as human beings to be, use term off balance, out of balance, which are like, I think I said a little bit out of whack, which is probably not as professional as a term, although I guess everybody knows what it means. But I would encourage everybody, if you're feeling anything that Babita is speaking about now, or that I mentioned, it's okay. And it's always been okay. And it's even more okay now in this world in which we live, as you said, where there's just tremendous information coming at us. And, the past 10 years, 15 years, there's been an awful lot of change. I think it's key. You see a lot of people and you say, and when they own it, that's probably, they don't own it because they're not comfortable, right? And they think something's wrong with me. I remember years ago, I had a really bad accident, and I've come to just explain to people, when I was desperate and suicidal and everything, I said, just like you would break your arm and you got to get a cast, sometimes your mind, your brain, your mind, whatever you want to call it, the way that we perceive the world, our narrative, as you said, the story that we're telling ourselves, it just gets broken. And sometimes I think we can fix it ourselves. And other times we need to do the work and connect with somebody like you. What are your thoughts on that? How many people do you see that show up for you that still are trying to put on a facade to say, I'm okay?
It happens a lot. And I think what's happening is we also have so much messaging. If we think about social media and how oftentimes everything looks so perfect, or what I call toxic positivity, that everything, it's going to be okay. It's, there's something about optimism, but there's something about dismissing that actually it's not okay. And it's okay to not feel like it's okay.
Right.
We have so much messaging today. I think our younger generation really, and with everything that's out there, people do come in and they come in with a bit of trepidation, like, oh, I don't know. I think I'm having a little bit of difficulty in my relationship or at work, but I'm fine.
Right.
Everything's great. It's just this one little piece. It's great. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
Or they'll even be talking about an issue, but they'll use but I also know that, but I also think, and I think that we do have to break that stigma. Still exists. We may be more leveraged and aware around mental health, but there's still a stigma to not lean into the discomfort of our feelings.
Right.
Say life is messy, and one could be extremely self-aware, doing the work, setting the boundaries, and still saying, oh, I am just like, this is really bad. Like, I am feeling slightly depressed, or I am so anxious, or I just don't feel great, right? Like, we're just all human beings walking each other home. I think what's important is don't dismiss it.
I love that. Yeah,
it, realize it, and notice you're not alone. I don't care what anyone puts or posts.
yeah,
You are not alone.
right. I love that we're all just human beings walking one another home. That's a wonderful way to look at it. And yeah, it's all going to be okay is one of the mantras that I hold on to. And for me, it's all going to be okay is the end game of life. There is messiness in between. So I like the distinction you make between that toxic positivity, where people in that toxic positivity world, I think they discount the brutal facts of what you're struggling with. There are times when you say it's messy, and quite honestly, life sucks. And we've got to get through these tough times. Now, for me, I think it's the positive thinking of moving through them is the key. So it's this, I can get through this. I have people that can help me. I'm vulnerable right now, and that's going to help me. And I see the other side of this messy time. I think that's the positive thinking versus, as you say, toxic positivity. Everything's okay. Everything's okay. Well, it's not. We have some work to do.
Yes, that's the distinction. And I think what happens is people kind of lose sight of the distinction. The toxic positivity is when we don't acknowledge it at all.
Right.
For example, it's like looking at a garden and you see weeds,
right,
and you say there are no weeds there. Whereas positivity, or thinking with more optimism that's healthy, is saying, there's my garden, but there are weeds there. What do I need to do to pull them out? What do I need to do to water my garden, start to see it flourish again, lean into my stress resilience? I have done this before. It's messy now. How do I lean into that and remember those times and use those coping mechanisms and think in that way and notice that, all right, I can get there. That's the difference, right? Yeah. No weeds versus I see the weeds, but there's some things that I can do with them, and there are resources to help me figure that out if I need to.
Right. Yeah, to get the garden back to the way it's intended to be, right? Just like
and I love the concept of life as a garden, right? Because it's just
it really is. It is. It's just all energy, right? We're all energy, and we're growing and moving towards the best version of ourselves, as you said, whether, your best version of a garden or best version of yourself. You said something a few minutes ago when we were talking about doing the work, which is really powerful. And you said, sometimes we have to get down into our unconscious. What are some ways that people could do that? And what happens when you get down there? I think I know what you're talking about. But for somebody else that says, oh my gosh, how do I get to my unconscious? If you talked about behavior, right? Which comes from our upbringing, the stories we've been told, and the beliefs that we still hold that maybe are not useful for us anymore. So that pathway into the unconscious, how do we get there? What's that all about?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's lots of ways to approach it. One pathway, I'd be remiss to not say psychoanalysis, since I'm a psychoanalyst, right? So it's almost like leveling deeper and deeper into allowing yourself to freely go to places, even if there's fear. So what happened in my family? What was that like? Let's go deeper.
Yep.
What does that mean for you? Oh, it felt like this. Let's go deeper. There was trauma that happened with my siblings. Well, let's go deeper. Tell me more about that. And then you just go layer by layer by layer. So that's one avenue, like literally, sitting in a professional space. But there are other ways. And
before we go to the other ones, that's great. When you get into that professional space and you guide people, lead people through those different layers, and I certainly know what you're talking about. Do you find that people have those aha moments as they get to those layers? Almost where they go, holy shit, that's why I'm thinking this. Now I see all these things as triggers, bringing that back up. Do you see them having that awareness, or is it a combination sometimes of you having to kind of hold up the mirror a little bit and say, come on, you got to see this now?
I try, and sometimes I do.
Yes.
But the best moments are the aha moments where people have removed their resistance or their fears to go there. And I've literally had clients say something like, oh my God, I was literally walking down the street in front of a Starbucks, and I said, this is what comes up with my husband. It's because I've always wanted to please my father. And
Right,
now
right.
I bring that into my marriage. And this
Yep.
is why I get so triggered when he says this, because my father used to say this. I don't know why I didn't put that together. Like
Yes.
literally things of that nature.
Wow, that's cool.
There, and then they'll like bring it into session or during session,
Mm,
they might say something like that. I hadn't realized that I had had a narcissistic parent. So when I deal with my manager, oh my goodness,
mhm,
there's some narcissistic flags here. No wonder I'm shaking when I go into, no wonder I can't do the work, that my job in the way that I thought I could.
mhm,
So the deeper
hmm.
subconscious work sometimes brings in what I call like also the inner child work,
Oh
right?
gosh, yeah.
Going into the what might the inner child have experienced with the parent or with others, that then you come into your conscious and then you have your aha moments as well.
Hmm.
Other times there's what I call resistance. Look, it's scary. So you don't want to go into those moments, those deeper, deeper unconscious spaces of
Sure.
fear, etc. But then I continue to say, let's just stay with that. We can take our time with that. We don't
Mhm.
have to figure it all out today. This is a
Yeah.
journey. Let's just stay with it.
Hmm. Hmm. So before I interrupted you, I think that's great. Thanks for elaborating on that. The aha moments that your clients
Yeah,
have, or sometimes that you will nudge them to have. You were going to say there were some other ways to kind of
sure.
access some of the subconscious for us, or the
Of
unconscious.
course. And I'm going to put aside things like modalities, of course, hypnotherapy, EMDR, et cetera. Other
Mm,
ways, I truly believe a lot of clarity can be gained if people do start a meditation practice.
mhm,
You can go into your subconscious, unconscious, if you stay with it
mhm,
and really just to try and quiet the mind
mm,
and to be able to just stay in the quiet and start your practice. Eventually people find that they start to reach into those deeper
yeah,
levels as well.
yeah.
I also feel that we can also go into those spaces. I do believe, even though this sounds cliche, in continuing to write. I
Yep.
do think when you're writing, you're processing.
Mhm,
You can also do that. I think there's also a space where what I call the replacing the thoughts. You could go into your subconscious and conscious if you challenge your thoughts. And
mhm.
if you do, some of this stuff when you're speaking,
Right.
you just looking and writing out what are some of your thoughts, some of your messages, a lot of them are your negative thoughts, and say, let me challenge this. Is this really truth?
Right.
What is the story? The reason why that helps you go into your subconscious or unconscious is it forces you to then dig deeper
Mhm.
into, wait a second, is that really truth? Well, if it's not, how may I look at it? Then you look at where that came from. Well, if it
Mm.
came from there, what does that mean?
Yep.
So that also helps that work as well, going into the subconscious.
Yeah, I think it's so important for people. I just wish everyone would create times of stillness and meditation throughout their day. I'm a big advocate for that, because I say that, I believe the spirit resides in stillness, and it's there when we can sit with our thoughts. As you
Mhm.
said, the realization that happens for people, and I'll talk to them about meditation, and they'll go, well, I keep thinking I can't turn my brain off. And I'm like, well, you don't have to. The point is, and it's the best thing that's happened for me in meditation, is you realize that you are not your thoughts. You're the thinker of them. So often day to day, we're just running around driven by our thoughts, and they're flying the proverbial plane. And although you say, when you can sit with them and really observe them and go, wait a minute, this isn't really a useful thought for me based on my intention. How could I think differently about it? And then some of those other prompts that you used. Yes, anybody out there that is not meditating, I would encourage you to experiment with it a little bit and
Yeah,
see if there's value for you.
yes, absolutely. I think there's one more that I think that it would be remiss not to bring up, Danny,
Mhm.
is parts work. And parts work helps with going into the subconscious mind. And you could do it with a professional, you could do it on your own. Parts work is recognizing that we are just not like one thought or our thoughts or one state of being. We have many parts or self states to
Hmm.
ourselves. If
Yes.
we can identify our parts, we can actually have our parts talk to each other.
Mm.
For example, you have the inner child as one part. You might have your commander in chief as another part. You may have the part of you that is the part that goes to work, the part that has the role in your relationship. You may also have the part that holds your confidence. I call it like Mr. or Miss C. Then the part that holds the fear, Mr. or Miss F.
Mm.
You can identify your parts, and
Mm.
there's so many of them. I just named a few,
Sure.
and let them talk to each other. You're going to realize how much deeper you can find out about yourself
Mm.
and say, what would this part say to this part to
Yes.
help me here?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. I never really heard it, saw it in that context, but I like that. I would call it your different roles you have, but I like the parts because the parts are all the sum of the whole. Whereas for
Mhm.
me, the roles are like these different hats that we wear. I like that. So how much, before I ask, Babita, where people can find out more about you and connect with you, and we kind of wrap up, and I'll ask you just to share, two or three things that you think are very important for people. How much of this mental wellness, mental health that we see now was triggered by the pandemic because the workplace changed so much? And you said earlier that oftentimes when people come and they say, oh, I have this problem in my life, this is what I'm dealing with, there are other ones. How much did the pandemic and the change in workplace open up those, maybe the other things that people are dealing with?
Mhm. Well, I think they definitely demonstrated for people to pause and to really think about their life when they started to think about what was happening in the workplace. So the pandemic was sort of for everyone that time of almost an extended, I mean, it went on for like 2 years.
Yes.
And it went on where there weren't really distractions. We didn't have external stimuli, the
Mm-hmm.
normal things we would normally do that actually would force us to almost distract ourselves
Mm-hmm.
and not really look at ourselves and look at what was happening. I
Right.
think it started with the workplace because people started to work remotely and say, am I really satisfied at work? All I'm doing is working because there's nothing else that's going on. They
Right.
started to notice and identify concept like burnout. They started to realize they needed boundaries. They started to
Mm-hmm.
face those things.
Right.
Because that was happening, they then realized, wait a second, what makes me happy? Why am I doing this? Does this still bring me joy? Because there
Mm-hmm.
weren't other things to cover it up.
Right.
We had to get really raw.
Yes.
It then segued into who they were either living with, who they were married to. And so there was then that, like, what's happening in my relationship? Are there things that my
Mm-hmm.
partner and I weren't looking at
Yeah.
that are
Yeah.
actually unhealthy? So we can see how it started with the workplace, but then
Mm-hmm.
started to create other really
Yeah.
powerful questions
Mm-hmm.
that lended itself to people saying, wow, I really need to look at my mental health, or wow, I
Mm-hmm.
hadn't realized this is what depression feels like, or this is what anxiety feels like. And
Yeah.
I've actually felt it before, not just in the pandemic, but I didn't know how to identify it
Right.
because I was doing all of these other things that, stopped me from really looking at it.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. I believe the lens, if we put the lens of the pandemic here, man, did we
Mhm.
see a lot of other things that we were missing before then. That's kind of how I've come to understand it. Well, listen, I certainly appreciate hanging out with you and speaking with you and kind of just getting all kinds of cool information and insight from you. What's the best place for people to go, Babita, and find more about you and your work and your practice?
Sure, there's lots of spaces. I mean, I have I actually have two websites, Babita Spinelli Group and Opening the Door Psychotherapy. I like to do a lot of writing, so I do post a lot of articles there that I've written, as well as podcasts and interviews and resources. I am on social media, and I think depending on what platform that people connect with, for some, they might go to Instagram and there are things that are posted there. I also post a lot on LinkedIn.
Yes.
As well. And so, and of course, Facebook. So, for me, I really want to say to everyone, you can, find all these resources there, but I'm still old fashioned. It's the generation I think I come from.
Right.
My phone number is there. People can reach out to me and literally call and leave a message. And I do get back to people, like whatever it is. And I think one of the things you wanted me to mention, Danny, is like, what do I think is important for people to know? Is I would say, don't dismiss yourself. You might think something is small, but it's okay to say, maybe it's not small to me. You may find that there's a lot of fears to look at something, but hold compassion to yourself and just realize it's just one small but mighty step to kind of figure out what you need. And also, it is okay to give ourselves permission to take that pause and say, I might need something else right now in my life. Maybe I'm not the same person about who I was, and it's okay for me to realize that. And so and look at that a little bit more deeply.
I love it. Some wonderful insight there, Babita. I certainly enjoy it. So listen, everybody, thank you for joining the podcast. And go ahead out and find Babita out on her website, her two websites, and her social media. And I think you'll enjoy and you'll gain value from her writings and from listening to her further. But I appreciate you all joining us on this episode of the Back to Life podcast. And until the next one, I would just encourage you to become the best version of yourself, develop a big, bold vision for yourself, and go after turning that into reality, and just understand that you have within you the ability to move through the tough times as well. That's what we're here for. So until next time, thanks a lot. Babita, thanks again for being a guest.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining this episode with Babita Spinelli. I'm sure you picked up a lot of great things that you can apply to yourselves and the people that you care for and the people that you lead as it relates to the mental health for them as they approach their work, their relationships, and in general, just life. The one thing that I found very interesting that we talked about was that definition of mental health by the World Health Organization, a state of well-being in which the individual realizes his or her own abilities. They can cope with normal stresses of life and can work productively and fruitfully and is able to make a contribution to his or her community. So I think mental health, the stigma of mental health years ago was that it was a diagnosis where people oftentimes needed medication. And now it's just saying, hey, the world is complicated. There are struggles for us all the time. And it's okay when we're feeling a bit out of balance. And I think it's important where Babita said we really need to pay attention to how we feel. 3 takeaways for me was simply this. Number 1, it's okay when we're a little bit out of balance and we don't feel right about some parts of our life. It's very important for us to own it and to be vulnerable and to seek support. Number 2, we've got to heighten our awareness. It was interesting. She said when the leader becomes more successful, they become less aware of themselves. And I think that might apply to all of us as well. Life gets busy, and I think we lose that awareness. So very important for us to be aware and slow down. As she talked about being mindful and practicing some stillness, I think it's very powerful. And then to sum it all up, she had a great line. Babita said, we're all humans walking one another home. And I think that we are. So thanks again for listening to the Back to Life podcast. I'm your host, Danny Bader. I wish you all the best in life as we head into the end of this year and we move into next year. And always go out there, be bold with your vision, and work hard to turn it into reality. And know that you have what you need to have to get through the difficult times. You've got resilience. So go ahead, seek some support. and work to lead a fulfilling life, because that is what we're here for. Until next time, peace.